The Haunted Mansion used to be so much scarier. This is because they used to have live scare actors in the ride. Hi, I'm Zach, and this channel is for the folks that love theme parks as much as I do. So go ahead and subscribe if you know the Haunted Mansion stretching room narration by heart, but refrain to say it out loud when you're in the pre-show like a decent human being.
Oh, I didn't mean to frighten you prematurely. The real chills come later.
The Haunted Mansion began sprinkling in these scare actors in 1985 when they were looking for a way to plus up the ride to help celebrate Disneyland's 30th anniversary. But unfortunately, these scare actors wouldn't stay in the mansion for very long because there were some incidents that made Disney rethink the whole scare actor thing. But we'll get into that a little later. There were 3 characters that they wanted to include in the mansion for Disneyland's 30th. There was the Ghoul. We don't know what the Ghoul actually looked like, so this is what our Ghoul is going to look like. Kind of cute, right? The Phantom and the infamous Knight. From what I've heard, the Ghoul basically had one day in the mansion. He was stationed right outside of the attic scene where the Hatbox Ghost is today, but it just flat out didn't work, and they couldn't figure out the right look for the costume, so he had one day in the mansion and then he was out. You know, they say that the Haunted Mansion is like a retirement home for ghosts, but sometimes it's more like a job and you just get fired. You gotta go. And sadly, the Phantom didn't survive very long in the mansion either. I think they only tested him out like 3 different times, like 3 different days. He was in a very dark section of the mansion between the ballroom and the attic. There's kind of a dark hallway in there, and he had dark clothing on, so people were just not seeing him, which is probably for the best because that character was creepy looking. But this costume was repurposed from the Phantom of the Opera character that would walk around Main Street Cinema back in the 60s. I believe that this character's name was Eric the Opera Ghost. I think that's the same name as the character from the movie. I've never seen the movie. Don't come at me for that. I've never seen Phantom of the Opera. I've seen Phantom of the Megaplex, the Disney Channel original movie. That was a good one.
Phantom of the Megaplex strikes again!
So yeah, they ended up ditching the Phantom as well, which was a bummer, but you can still find his likeness as a popcorn turner at the popcorn stand at Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, but they refer to him as the Undertaker, not Eric the Opera Ghost. And then we have the Knight, the only character to actually stay in the mansion for a pretty good chunk of time. He was stationed in the corridor of doors. He could roam between the conservatory and the grandfather clock, but he was instructed to stay at least 5 feet away from guests, and he couldn't cross the Omnimover track. And all the cast members that wore the Knight costume were specifically instructed to startle guests, not frighten them, but some cast members took this a little too far. Apparently, one cast member in particular would get behind the Doom Buggy, jump on the back of it, and lean down and try to grab the people sitting in the ride vehicle. Now keep in mind, this is a moving Doom Buggy, so not the safest thing to do. And this type of stuff would eventually lead to many cast members getting attacked by guests. Some Knights would get spit on, hit with purses, and punched. There's even a report of a cheerleader breaking the nose of one of the cast members in the costume. But these cast members weren't the only ones that would get into trouble in the mansion. Sometimes the Knights would stand still in the hallway and wait until the last minute to startle the people passing by. But if they stood motionless for too long, people would think that they were alone, and the cast members could sometimes catch people doing some pretty wild stuff, like people trying to get out of the ride vehicle to wander around the attraction, people smoking in the Doom Buggy, and apparently they also caught some people trying to pleasure each other in the Haunted Mansion. So when these scare actors would notice stuff like this, they'd have to stop the ride. They were able to do this by using what they refer to as a hand pack, which to me sounds just like a little remote. Once the ride would stop, the Knight would either confront the guest or another cast member would come over to remedy the situation. Shortly after Disneyland's 30th anniversary, the Knight was phased out, most likely due to safety concerns for cast members and guests. But on top of that, it also seemed like a pretty disliked effect by most families. But then in 1995, all of a sudden those safety concerns washed away when Disneyland began to celebrate their new Halloween event called Mickey's Halloween Treat. This party ran from 1995 to 1996. And this is when they really started to expand on the characters. The Knight returned, but he was also joined by a whole new cast of characters like a mummy, a gravedigger, and a vampire. And they put these guys all over the place. They scattered them throughout the attic, they're hanging out in the graveyard. They even put a scare actor at the very end of the ride when you're going up the escalator. Now, this feels like a very haunted house carnival dark ride kind of move. And then in 1996, they were at it again for a second round of this Halloween event, where they had a knight, a dead groom, a grim reaper, and a bride. And I have to say, it's kind of a bummer to see that they decided to put an actor portraying Constance right next to the animatronic of Constance. At least, I think that's who that lady's supposed to be. It feels a little strange to me. But once Mickey's Halloween Treat had its final run, the mansion didn't see the return of scare actors until the Haunted Mansion's 30th anniversary in 1999, where guests were invited to ride an enhanced version of the Haunted Mansion at midnight. And this seemed like this was a pretty similar version that was done to Mickey's Halloween Treat. But what's interesting to me is that when they first put those original 3 characters in the ride, they were very intentional about placing them in transitional areas of the ride and avoided putting them in big show scenes like the conservatory or the ballroom. I think there was a concern that if a live actor was placed in a bigger scene that they may become a distraction, but as they continued to do these special events, that whole concept really went out the window. Because when they decided to do this again in 2019 for the mansion's 50th anniversary, they were all about adding actors to the actual show scenes rather than dark transitional spaces. And this is more than likely because they weren't intending to scare guests anymore, but rather give them something new to look at in the mansion. They had a knight pacing back and forth in the endless hallway, a ghost seated at the table in the ballroom, and finally they had an actor take the place of Gus in the hitchhiking ghost scene. See, that's what I'm talking about. They made the right move there. They removed the animatronic and they kept the actor, so you didn't have this Gus multiverse duplicate thing going on. And we've also seen characters portraying ghosts at Walt Disney World's Haunted Mansion for Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party. They're usually stationed right outside of the mansion and they're all mic'd up so they can interact with people in the queue. They definitely function more as entertainment than scare actors here, but it seems like it's a good time. And if I'm not mistaken, Walt Disney World's mansion doesn't do live actors in the actual ride, just outside of the ride. But the Haunted Mansion isn't the only attraction to have live actors. Pirates of the Caribbean has also done this. One of the most notable times was back in 2017 when Johnny Depp reprised his role as Captain Jack Sparrow and was placed in the ride to promote the film Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales. They've also put live actors in Pirates of the Caribbean for Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party. And not only did they put them in the ride, but they also have them in the queue, which is pretty fun because you can get pretty close to them and they usually interact with you. And I've even seen some cast members really get into the role and kind of act like scare actors. There was a time at the Haunted Mansion when we were walking into the foyer and there was a Haunted Mansion butler that jumped out from behind the door and startled a bunch of people. And the bellhops at the Tower of Terror really get into character sometimes. I feel like always at the end of the ride, there's a bellhop that puts their face really close to the elevator doors, so when you pull into the unload station and those doors open up, they're always right there for that final jump scare. And Universal Studios has also dabbled in putting scare actors in their attractions. Skull Island Reign of Kong had scare actors in the queue, kind of hiding in the rock work of the caves. Sounds like they don't do that anymore though, so if you're afraid to go on that ride because of the queue, you're all good. I know that I definitely didn't want to go on that ride at one point because I didn't want to get jump scared, so that was why I purposely bought the express pass so I could bypass that whole jump scare thing. Sounds like I didn't have anything to worry about anyway because they had already gotten rid of that, but just so you know, you should be clear. And of course, Universal Studios Hollywood has had their fair share of all year-round haunted houses. In May of 2001, the Mummy Returns Chamber of Doom haunted attraction opened, and it featured props and set pieces from the Mummy film, as well as a ton of scare actors. But it closed in 2004 and was replaced by a new haunted house themed to the film Van Helsing. It was called Van Helsing Fortress Dracula, and it ran from 2004 to 2006. Then it became Universal's House of Horrors, where it had a ton of different classic Universal monsters like Frankenstein and Wolfman, but also had a few characters from films like Psycho and Chucky. And of course, The Walking Dead also had an all-year-round haunted house at Universal Studios Hollywood. But I'm not gonna lie, that Van Helsing ride it stuck with me a little bit. That was one of the first attractions that I ever went on visiting California as a kid. It was a big trip where we went to Disneyland and Universal Studios Hollywood, and Universal was the first place we went, and Van Helsing was the first attraction that we went on, and we didn't know it was a haunted house. So I was kind of in for a big surprise once that thing started getting spooky, because we just thought it was like a behind the scenes like look at the movie. Yeah, I didn't expect there to be a bunch of scare actors jumping out, so that was kind of a bad way to start the trip. So there you go. Let me know if you can think of any other attractions that have featured scare actors. And if you're still here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate it.
Ah, there you are. And just in time. There's a little matter I forgot to mention. Beware of hitchhiking ghosts.